Hello and welcome to the Cyber SN Virtual CISO Roundtable. My name is Matt Donato, Managing Director here of Cyber SN. Today we're going to be discussing the emerging threats and how to minimize risk in the healthcare industry. Obviously, very, very broad topic, lots of meat to that. We could probably spend hours upon hours, if not days, talking about security, let alone that within the healthcare industry, which means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Healthcare, as we know, is obviously a huge sector in itself, with a number of subsectors. So we will do our best to unpack that. But in this panel discussion, our goal is to create a collaborative forum where executives and senior leaders in the healthcare industry with various different walks of life in the security community from various different paths can weigh in on some of the challenges that we're seeing in healthcare, specifically through the lens of cybersecurity. So we're all consumers of healthcare service or products in the same shape or fashion, and much like most complex regulated industries experiencing modernization and change. The landscape is changing, the path forward is changing. COVID certainly added an interesting mix to things. It's been a very interesting ride to see what's happened through the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, and what that looks like going forward. One thing that I've noticed is in working with a lot of healthcare organizations, it's challenging for some and more challenging for others. I don't think it's an easy walk for anybody. And so we're certainly going to examine some of the things that we were seeing in there and take it from there. I'm going to unpause Barbie because it looks like you're joining us in two places right now. So give me a second. So get your phone. Barbie, why don't you give us a little sound check to see if your audio is good? Nope, not good. I'm going to merge your audio. See if I can do that. There you go. How's that?
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Yep.
She's back. All right. So without further ado, a perfect awkward segue into our panelists. So first of all, we have Rick Doughton. He's the VP of Information Security at Centene Corporation. He's also the CISO for the Carolina Complete Health Group. Kyle Becker, CISO at Bright Insight, and Barbie Moonaghan, who is the VP of Security at CISO CPO at Woobot Health. Did I get that correct?
Woobot, yep.
Yeah, gotcha, Woobot. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you three to make quick introductions, define what you do, your scope of responsibility for the people that are participating here, just a little bit more clarity and insight to your world, if you would. Let me start with you, Rick.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am the CISO for Carolina Complete Health, which is a Medicaid health plan for Centene Corporation, but I also act as, I am the VP of Information Security for corporate as well. And so there I act as kind of a fractional CISO for our healthcare enterprises and other aspects of our business. So I kind of say my job is think globally, act locally. I help corporate, and then I help the local health plan here in North Carolina.
Beautiful. Thank you for the intro. And so obviously Centene, a very small organization, doubt you have a large scope of responsibility, doubt there's any complexity to that matrix organization. So I can only imagine what the day-to-day, and I'm going to turn it over to Barbie. Barbie, kind of give us a little bit more insight to your world, if you would.
Hello, yes, I am the Chief Information Security and Privacy Officer here at Woobot Health. And Woobot Health is their entire purpose is to bring meaningful engagement from an AI perspective for digital mental health. So Woobot is essentially a bot that you can talk to that is bringing therapeutic solutions to the individuals when they need it and where they need it. And so underneath of my realm, I have obviously security, including all the good GRC stuff, incident response, vulnerability management, pretty much everything security, you name it, it's there in a cloud-based environment. And then of course the privacy realm as well. So because health, you have multiple healthcare regulations that we work underneath of. And then of course, because we're worldwide and available worldwide, there's also a number of different world regulations that is considered there as well. And then of course, to be at the table for our senior leadership team and our executive leadership team for business strategy to make sure that as we move forward, we're making really good decisions with our clients.
Excellent. Good. Thank you for that. That was very, very thorough. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Kyle Becker, please introduce yourself to the group, if you would.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, CyberSN, for hosting this. So Kyle Becker, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer and Chief Privacy Officer for Bright Insight. Bright Insight is a software technology company. We build software as a medical device for leading biopharma and medical device companies out there. So very similar to Barbie, this is more of an international kind of reach. So we certainly, have to take into consideration not only domestic U.S. Regulations, but really look at that international lens and all of the privacy requirements from every country that we deploy in. So very similar. I have full security operations and cloud security ownership, and really all the controls that fall underneath that.
Excellent. So let's kind of unpack, starting with you, Kyle. We'll kind of go in reverse order. Your program that you have ownership for, if you will, is that a fairly mature program that's been in place for quite some time, or is that something that you personally have built in the last 3 to 5 years?
So it's a relatively newer program, 4 to 5 years old. We do hold a high trust certification and an ISO 27001 certification. So it's fairly mature. We are a smaller startup organization, so certainly not the same scale as a large Fortune 500 company. But we've put in the right controls to meet those healthcare requirements, which are fairly steep requirements in the security realm.
Sure. And Barbie, much like Kyle, probably a product-centric environment, very much on the bleeding edge of technology. I have to imagine. I'm making an assumption here, so forgive me. Program is probably still being built as the vehicle's going 70 miles an hour. You're probably trying to change the tires along the way. So tell us a little bit more about kind of the history there and kind of the current state, if you would.
Right. What really impresses me about Wobot Health is that from the get-go, the decisions that were made were based in ethics and based in doing what is right for the end user. And so while, yes, there are things that, those fine line items to get a certification, there's requirements that we have to put in paperwork that may need to be drafted to really mature and move the process along. And as the company emerges as well and gets larger, there's a lot more business operation that you have to take into account. So the difference between that enterprise and the actual product security itself. So, really building out the good processes and policies around how to support the business supporting the product. That does need to grow and develop, but Wobot Health is mental health focused. It is based in that really good environment that they built a lot of the stuff into it by nature. And so I walked into a dream for a CISO. Of course, maturation is needed as it's a smaller company, and there's a lot of things, little things here and there that need to be done, and that need to be shown. But I am new. I started about 3 months ago, and so as I'm getting to know their architecture better, and as I'm getting to know the decisions, the whys behind it, the whys behind certain decisions were made, I'm very, very impressed with at how young of a company it is, how mature they are with their operations.
Yeah, and so maturity, and thank you for that. Maturity comes in stages, obviously, and it's a journey that you all obviously are on in different phases. And speaking of enterprise security, I mean, Rick, you're with Centene, obviously a Fortune 23, 22 now. I lose track. Like you guys change the rankings almost like college basketball does week after week. So kind of give us, in your world, for what she was talking about, enterprise security versus the small to mid-sized businesses, touch on that a bit and what you see. I mean, obviously funding and people resources, et cetera. And we'll talk about that eventually, but tell us a little bit about kind of the enterprise security vantage point and pros and cons, if you will. And then we'll talk more about today's landscape.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I do a lot of CISO roundtables, and I kind of find that, being in a unique position, being like a Fortune 25 company, is that, we have resources, we have budget, we're doing everything. It's just, some things we're doing better than others, and some things we can improve on. So on one side, it is, we have a mature organization, we have a mature program that has been around for over a decade. And, we have had a name CISO for, not the same one, but, for a long time. And so we're doing all the things that we should be doing. The challenge in a very large organization, of course, is scale, because a lot of while processes are sent to scale, sometimes tooling is not sent to scale. And as well as, organizations like ours, which come through acquisitions, we have a lot of things that we need to, roll in, absorb or kind of still manage. And so there's a lot of moving parts internally and a lot of disparate parts. And then finally, it's kind of like, because there's so many organizations, there's such of silos of specialties. And so, when I talk to vendors, I'm like, hey, talking to someone at my level is not really helping. I'm on the steering committee that approves it. At the end, it's 4 levels down that are people actually do the work and do things. I really don't do much, in that relation. And so it gets a lot tougher to kind of work with and get things done, just because, like any very large company, turning the ship takes a long time to be able to get things in. So, while my peers kind of are jealous of the budget and the resources that we have, it's, the red tape and the politics and the, who owns budget or who's responsible for certain things, just becomes a bigger challenge.
Yeah, that's great. You touched on a lot of really good things. I want to kind of tease that apart a layer at a time if we can. And those of you that are joining, we had a kind of a planning call, and I quickly realized that we really could spend hours upon hours talking about a number of these different items. And so we really picked 3, right? And so one I want to focus in on is what you all kind of share as a risk in the landscape of which you manage or oversee, and that's the supplier chain risk, the vendor partnerships. Rick, you just touched on that. Barbie, you were pretty passionate and had a pretty strong opinion on what you're seeing there, backed by obviously validated data. Rick, you were able to chime in. So let's kind of build on that a bit and talk about the supplier chain risk and vendor partnerships. I guess the current state, where things are versus where they were. How does that help, or maybe speak to some of the challenges that you're having there, and let's bring that to the surface. Barbie, why don't we start with you on that topic? It was something that you were pretty passionate about on the supplier chain risk vendor partnerships that you've had. Do you recall kind of when we were in this conversation before, just talking about third party, fourth party risk, working with suppliers, working with vendors, and how that process or that relationship is sometimes tarnished a bit, and how there's a different push-pull dynamic? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. And I agree. So supplier risk chain and the partnership with a supplier is one of the most important elements that we have as security and honestly privacy professionals, because those are the connections to the outside world that, if compromised, it will compromise you. And so there's different layers to understanding that risk. A couple of years ago, the gas pipeline that went down, or when you look at Merck, when unfortunately they went down, and you had trucks lined up for miles for transportation that couldn't get things through the across the country to be able to have supplies across the country. It went down because it was a compromise from a individual piece of software that was being utilized. And so when we're now looking at how our vendor partners do security as well, and how they handle privacy as well, we open ourselves up to an incredible amount of risk. But also, and I don't know whether or not one of those topics is going to be into contracts, but I'm also incredibly passionate about what contracts look like and how we set those up, because those are our keys and our gateways into making sure that from a legal perspective, we can hold accountable to the appropriate individuals. And we know, and we have assurances to say there is incident response in place. You can protect our data. You can not only are you protecting our data, but you're protecting our infrastructure itself. And that having those really good relationships throughout the entire life cycle of a supplier is what will set you up for success, or potentially set you up for failure. Love to have more conversations on the supplier. No, I'm not going to go too far into it, but one of the things I'm very passionate about, and Kyle, you've seen this many, many times, is attestation forms. So in the event that there's a compromise in another company, you have something prepared, and you have already almost an IRP specifically for supplier management, where you have a form and a commitment from that supplier that if something were to happen, you already have that communication open and they already know how to communicate the information back to you. So having like an attestation form that has all the information that's relevant to you so that they can provide, they, instead of getting on a phone call, spending 4 hours trying to track down what happened, you send over a document, they fill it out, they send it back. It might be an hour-long phone call to try to figure some things out, and then you move forward. And you already have the information that you need for containment and things to that nature. So yes, the vendor partnerships are so critical in everything that we do.
Yeah, and Kyle, build on that. And I know, Rick, you probably have an interesting or probably a similar viewpoint on this, because I know you and I have talked about this offline before. But Kyle, tell us about your ecosystem and how that is similar and dissimilar. I'm sure those partnerships are very valuable, but how does the relationship tie into the exposure and the risk that you have in your kind of current state with your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you really inherit that risk of your partners upstream and downstream. So, well, upstream for sure. And, I think being involved, bringing security into those contract negotiations up front is critical, making sure that you have real clear terms defined and you're not committing to things that you can't execute on. So, there is a lot of trust put into, those relationships. You have, not only the contracting details that lay out, but also any kind of security assessments or questionnaires that need to be done. And then really, making sure that you're doing the follow-up, that it's not just a one-time, one and done, we've qualified this vendor and we don't have to worry about them again, but really maintaining that relationship and also trying to maintain, contacts. So if something did go wrong, that you know who to contact and you have that direct relationship, you're not scrambling to get a hold of legal counsel to get a hold of their security, but really building those relationships and having those more open dialogues with your vendors.
That's great. Rick, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, no, this is a topic we all talk about in the industry all the time. I mean, even last night I was on a CISO dinner and this was a long discussion about third-party risk management. So in our case, since we're a healthcare payer, a lot of our, I say, partners are actually our providers, the people that we, doctors' offices and the hospitals that we pay. And while they are covered entities in and of themselves, we have different relationships with them, but they're often less secure because they are just a small doctor's office. And so a lot of our challenge with our co-partners is the fact that they may get compromised and, they send an email saying, hey, change the payment of, bank information from this to this. And then, we have processes to call them and say, did you really do this? Or I think your account just got compromised because they got their account taken over. And then, of course, we have other third parties like everybody else does that we may have to, if we share any PHI with, have to set up a business associate agreement. And within that, we have all the stuff Barbie talked about, locked into the security requirements in the security addendum of the BAA, as well as other contract requirements. And those includes things about, notification if something goes wrong, about, sometimes requiring to have cyber insurance, regarding, having those contact information. And then oftentimes we had, and I think last year we had like 22 different partners of ours that had ransomware that we had to deal with. And sometimes it's, we help them. We provide them threat intelligence. We connect them with different groups. We provide them some telemetry to help them in giving, indicators of compromise. So it becomes, and I think Barbara kind of talked about this, how, we want to, we're really their partner. And so we want to help them be more secure because it makes all of us secure.
And Rick, you in your organization, you work with providers, we talked about payers, med devices, HDOs, delivery. Tell us about kind of that world in itself and the complexities and how that kind of correlates with the vendor relationships and how do you prioritize how busy that really is? Where do you spend your time or your organization spend its time in that context?
You mean from prioritizing third-party risk management? It's kind of based on like the number of records, how important certain data is. It kind of goes back to data classification guidelines. And so we also have, because we're big enough to have a whole quantified risk management team that does quantified risk analysis that's able to, put in and give a number to what the risk is. And that's how we kind of rack and stack them to say, this is a more risky relationship than others. And so certain things like, big ones like, Microsoft or AWS, while we may have a lot of data on there, those are also very big companies, bigger than us even. And so, there are certain, acceptability that we have that they have that they're protecting, where there may be some other smaller hosting company that we would have a lot more scrutiny in because they're holding things, or someone who's doing data analytics for us. So it's kind of based on the business impact and the risk and the likelihood of that, which comes up with a number, was how we kind of rank what we focus the most on and what kind of questions we ask or attestation we want to be able to prove it.
Interesting. And with this, I have to imagine has to come significant backing from the top, so buy-in from the from the executive suite, and then obviously funding to support that. So if we could segue to the kind of second challenge that we've all agreed is a really a big area that does need to be addressed. It's the lack of resources and perhaps the funding associated with that. And I don't know if that's in that hierarchical order that how things are stacked up, but this is a great place for you, Rick, because you work in a very large enterprise security organization. How is that relevant for your group? And if so, I want to kind of turn that over to Kyle and to Barbie next to kind of get their take on funding, lack thereof, resources, lack thereof. And of course, we want to be above bar in how we speak about our employers, but just by and large, fundamentally, as what you see in the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate because we have resources and we have funding, and whatever we can make the case for, we can get. And obviously we're not unlimited in that, but as long as we can make the case, it's usually not it's usually available. And that's where we're kind of in a better position than others. Where I talk to lots of peers who are struggling with trade-offs, like, well, I can afford either protecting this or protecting that, which is more important to me. And so those are things that small organizations have to deal with, and we don't have that challenge.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. Barbie, I mean, obviously you're up and coming organization, merging, doing a lot of great things, younger program, different, similar, dissimilar, kind of give us your take and kind of what you all do to combat maybe not having as much as what a Centene would in a larger organization.
So having come from a larger organization to progressively smaller organizations, because apparently I was startups, then I love being able to mature and do things that are really relevant to.
I love it. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
Say again?
So three vendors.
But
yes.
Yeah. Having come from a larger organization that we did have resources, I mean, we still had the same battles of, do we put this protective control in place? Do we take this one away? Do we have the personnel that we need to do this? What do we need to concentrate? What do we need to mature this time around? There were all those elements in the larger organization as well. But in Rick and Kyle, we talked about this on the prep session, which was the fact that in larger organizations, you have tech debt that you're constantly trying to get away from. Whereas in the newer organizations, if we have a unique opportunity to take advantage of having the security knowledge that we do now that wasn't in place years and years ago when these tech environments were created in these large environments. We have the advantage of saying, let's back up. Let's do security by design. Let's do privacy by design. Let's bake some of this into the core concepts. And then, of course, we have, again, the suppliers that we're incorporating. Are we leveraging them in the right capacity to allow for secure and private practices within their environment, which we're seeing we can do that. We can do that faster. We can do automation. We can do all kinds of really good, fun things now in smaller companies that inherently makes our outside potentially more secure and less to keep up with. That's not saying that we're perfect or that the larger companies are perfect. I'm saying that there are individual challenges within both. The one thing I did want to touch on was the difference between the large companies that have the potential of having personnel that you may have junior positions and you may have senior positions and you may have a complex organization of specialties, whereas in your smaller companies, we often don't have that privilege. And so we have to pick and choose as we build, as we grow, we have to pick and choose which ones do we need right now, and which ones are we making sure that we have generalists around. And so we don't have a lot of really good ability to say, okay, let's take on 3 interns this time around so that we can help with the obvious gap that we have in being able to get enough people into our environment. But those are some of the bigger to smaller things that I see in those differences.
So is it safe to assume in your world that you probably have to have a hybrid of people who actually are employees or contractors or interns supporting you and outside managed services? And I'm sure that the obvious answer is yes, and it depends on to what degree. How do you see that changing back to healthcare in your business, your industry, with reg changes and perhaps maybe lack of controls, or being in a very tech-centric organization that's probably moving at a 100 miles an hour a minute? What do you do in to combat that, knowing that you're probably playing catch up a great deal of time? Is there some strategies that you could recommend that you've tried to implement that really has been able to keep up with the pace, assuming that is the pace in which you all operate, something to that degree?
And I will actually, because I know, Kyle, you and I have had a lot of conversations around this exact topic. So I'll give a little bit of my insight into it, and then Kyle, I'm going to pass it over to you because I think that you do a fantastic job with handling this specific scenario. So I'm just going to introduce the idea of augmentation, augmenting your workforce or your tech stack or anything to that nature. And to me, automation helps a lot because we aren't recreating the wheel over and over again. But Kyle, I will pass it over to you because I know that this is something you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think everyone is facing the same challenge. It's hard to get qualified security professionals. Technology is moving fast, the skill sets are changing right now, and competition is steep. So you really do need to leverage managed services, staff aug models, contract models, and really prioritize, what you're working on. So, it's a challenging environment, and, we don't have enough, professional resources out there. So you really have to kind of, pull from any source that you can. Obviously trying to automate and trying to streamline your process is, kind of the holy grail, and where you want to get to. But a lot of times you have to, kind of get some cycles in to understand exactly what your operational requirements are before you automate. So, bringing in an expert to really kind of lay out a roadmap or lay out kind of, what the best practice is, and then understanding exactly what you're going to need to fill in with either internal resources or, potential managed service. But, I think it is really, you're pulling from everything. You're trying to have you have to have internal resources, I believe, at least a handful, but then leveraging partners, leveraging managed services, really, the full bag.
So how do you combat the speed in which your organization operates? How do you combat that with?
Can I say?
Yeah, please go ahead, Barbie.
Can I say one more thing? So just to kind of tack onto that, I think at the core, when you're a smaller company, is that you have to architect it right to begin with. You have to create good standardization so that your environment doesn't go wild. The wild west is so hard. If we don't know it exists, we can't protect it. So good architecture in the beginning, making sure that things are standard, to make sure that you're able to track and that you're able to keep things reduced, like your footprint, your tech stack footprint should be reduced down to minimal items. And then to Kyle's point, making sure that we have that good automation in place as we start to learn and develop it. The first time you got to do it just to know what you got to do, and then getting that automation into place. But really architect and then reduce tech stack to minimal items, and then automate. I think that's kind of really where we have to go, and then augment at the end where you need.
Yeah, Rick, anything you wanted to add to that?
Nope, totally agree. Security from the beginning makes it a lot easier when it gets to it. And that's a challenge and the tech debt that I kind of reference, we make acquisitions or we make decisions and, things weren't put in and now we're trying to bolt on afterwards and it just makes it more complicated. So when you have the opportunity to do it from scratch, do it.
Yeah, it's a great segue.
You bring up a good point.
Yeah, are you finding that you're having to constantly get buy-in from the top, or do you feel like you have pretty much autonomy to do what you need to do at the pace in which you need to do it with the right resources in the platform? And I'm sure that definition varies depending on the company and the complexity of it. But Barbie, you seem to have a good sense of what's happening right now and where your challenges are. So I'll kind of turn that to you, let you expand on that, buy-in from the top and support from the top.
again, I'm really fortunate to be in a company that supports me and that really truly buys into and understands the relevance and importance of security and privacy. But really, when we're having conversations with the top, as you state, when we're having those conversations, it's all about business enablement. And we hear all the time the antiquated way of thinking of security is that we're the department of no, et cetera, but moving towards that business enablement. And Rick, I know that you've had this topic before as well, that business enablement has like a vague term to it, but there are things that you can implement and that you can do to make sure that when you're sitting at the table, when you're having those conversations, that you're really educating and you're making sure that informed decisions are being made based on the risk to the company, weighing the risk to the company, and weighing what can make the company function. We can't get in the way of the company function. In CIA, there is the A, and a lot of times we forget about that. We forget that the A is about availability. And if our business can't move forward and it can't function, then we've completely missed the mark on the core foundation that we are. And so when I have conversations with our leadership team, those conversations are based on, let me understand the business purpose, let me understand what each lane needs and what their end goals are, and let me work with the business to make sure that we can succeed, but in a safe manner. And that helps with making sure that there is support, because I am a supportive function and I help move things along versus, hey, I need a bunch of money to go block a bunch of your stuff. Those are very, very different concepts, and they're very, very different ways of approaching it. And that's just the way that I like to do it. And then, of course, having, for me, having amazing leadership has also been fantastic. So.
No, I agree. I think, it really is a risk discussion with the leadership, not trying to create panic or fear, but really, just having a realistic risk conversation, with the executive leadership of, this is, this is what could happen. This is potential. Working in the healthcare industry, working with, a highly regulated industry, the executive leadership understands, that there is a high bar there, and having that realistic, grounded, risk-based conversation is really what drives, I think, the investment and kind of building that confidence and expanding your capabilities in a security program.
Yeah, I think that as a CISO, our job is to know the business. And I was a virtual CISO for 5 years before coming here. And the things where I saw organizations struggle with that kind of cliche that, oh, the board is not behind it and you have to fight with them. It's like, no, that's not the case at all. Particularly a large public company, they're pushing, if anything else. And they're like, what are you doing about this? How are you doing that? I want you to make me feel comfortable about this. And do you have the resources to do it? What do you need? And so, but it's because we have a bad CISO who thinks that person knows what it needs to be done. Technical people don't make business decisions. And a lot of the things are business decisions, like Barbie described. Their job is to keep the business in business. We act as the general counsel. We just provide advisement and risk-based, suggestions, but they make the decision, and they can choose to do something that we vehemently disagree with. Like, hey, I think it's a really bad idea, but it's your business. Sign here, just so if something goes wrong, then you know that you acknowledge and you accept and you are accountable for this risk and not me.
And do you find that you, at the executive level, what are you briefing the C-suite or even the board members on? What are they asking for in today's climate? And let's keep this through the lens of healthcare. What are the 3-5 things, whatever number arbitrarily you want to add, you want to attach to this? What are they expecting to hear from you as stakeholders, as leaders of these programs? Let me start with you, Kyle. We'll work our way across, because I'm sure this is a little bit of a similar but yet different answer for each of our business models.
Yeah, I think, really speaking towards, like Barbie and Rick said, really, speaking towards the impact to your specific business, not just in theory, not just, this is a risk out there to, kind of a different industry, but really, kind of translating what that would mean to your specific business line and the impact that it would have. I think those are, some of the most grounded conversations. and really just being upfront and honest with them, not, like I said, not trying to sensationalize anything or trying to use it as leverage to get more funding, but, really being a good steward of your resources and having an honest conversation, an honest and open conversation with your board and executive leaders.
In Barbie, is that different, similar from what you experienced, what you're mandated or requested to do?
No, I completely agree with Kyle. It's important to make sure that we're prioritizing, not only that we are identifying what the risk is, but that we're prioritizing appropriately what those risks look like. So you're not bringing to the top a server that has absolutely no business, that's behind like 3 walls and only 2 people have access to it, but there's this critical vulnerability, but that's the one that you focused on versus the one that's hanging out there. You got a major component that has a major vulnerability and you're just shoving both of them at the same time. Just fix it. We can't do that. We can't approach things in that manner, especially not anymore. So having those good conversations, making sure that we're prioritizing our impact, prioritizing the risk. I also, when we are talking to our other executive leaders or other senior leaders, the first time that you're talking to your CEO or your board or your clients should not be when an incident is happening. It should not be when critical mass is happening. You should be providing value, insight, and understanding of what the business is and what it needs to operate for. And then you should, when that happens, you already have the buy-in because they know that you're there as a partner. I believe very sincerely that the first time that you're talking to someone should not be in the middle of an incident. And I do also believe that from a vendor supplier risk as well.
Yeah, and it will vary depending on where you are on your maturity scale. When you first start talking to them, and as Barbie says, like, hey, let me tell you about the security program. These are things that I'm worried about because of the business, and these are things I want to work with you. And then you may give more things about, at the beginning, you may start with, different, vulnerabilities or things that we fixed or showing that how you benefited them or kept things up. And then of course on compliance, because oftentimes that's the first thing they kind of, I was like, are we compliant with everything? Because we don't want to get fined, or we don't want to lose our ability to work if we're compliant. So, then it matures to a point where it varies. And, I was a virtual CISO and I briefed many boards and they all kind of want different things. When some may want to know, okay, just make sure we're compliant with everything. Cool. Like, where are we on the projects that we already approved, and how we're going on those? Do we have coverage for everything? Do we have the right resources? Okay, great. And then what are our adversaries doing? And so in certain cases, there might be named adversaries that we're tracking, and they want to know, it's like, all right, well, what activity have we seen with our partners, with us? Have they changed any of their tactics? Did we need to be able, what have we done to remediate, to account for that? And it gets down to like real nitty gritty things of, we're protecting the walls, and all the baseline stuff they get. There's like, okay, we trust that. And you'll let me know if there's something that you're having a challenge with, let's say in, data security or data governance, we're struggling with this because this new thing happened, we talk about that. So it really varies. And that's the problem that, a lot of times in our roundtables, we talk about, what metrics are we doing? And it's kind of like with parenting, right? Like what works for me may not work for you, depending on the, personality of your kids.
Like it. I love it. Love the comparisons. I want to hit quickly pause. I want to come up for air and see if people have questions. Feel free, if you do have questions, people attending this panel, to put those in chat. Happy to address your questions that you have for the 3 panelists that we do have. Again, we apologize for some technical difficulties towards the beginning of this, but we've moved on and we're forging ahead. And so feel free to ask questions as you have them. I know we've got some compression for time here, but just to kind of come back down, if you have questions, Jessica and I will gather the questions we can and direct them towards the respective person. Well, let's kind of move on. There's
to one more.
Please.
Can I bring up one more thing? I know I keep saying it, but let me bring up one more thing. So in that relationship, so you've built upon trust, Rick. You did a fantastic job of describing how to layer that, how to get them relevant information. At first, it is going to kind of be a flood because it's all kinds of stuff. But what I do want to caution for is that, Kyle, you stated we don't want to scare, but we also don't want to hide. Don't shove things underneath the rug. And I think it's easy for us to try to be like, nope, everything's fine here. Everything's fine here. Don't look this way. But in reality, if we aren't being upfront with those conversations, and we're not having those conversations with the individuals that matter, and that can provide that good guidance and the backing to be able to purchase the product, be able to do the things, if we're not showing what's actually wrong and what needs to be fixed, prioritize it, make sure that it's the right thing. If we're not doing that, it can actually have the opposite effect. Because if we're sitting there saying, everything's shiny, Captain, there's gonna be a lot of conversations, potentially internally as well, that there might be questions around either, hey, everything's fine, we just continue operations, we can cut budget by 5%, that's fine. Or, they start talking and they're like, how can we be fine all the way across the board? What are we doing here? And what does this actually look like? So just being honest is an incredibly important part.
Yeah, I believe, that is just an ongoing conversation to say, these are the high risks we're seeing, and this is what this is how we're maturing our security program. This is where we're, starting to invest. We see this as more of an emerging threat. And so we're going to, look at this domain and really try and improve our maturity there. So having that conversation along the way, so, there aren't surprises. I think, for the most part, most of the threats are fairly common, and you can kind of see coming, making sure that you're investing in your program in the right areas and really relate, tying those together for the executive leadership to say, this is where we need to spend the money because this is what we're seeing. Ransomware was a real easy example. It's on the news, everybody hears about it. So really, addressing those risks and how you're improving your program.
Yeah, exactly. And how to communicate when they see it in mainstream media, because they'll come to you and say, hey, what are we doing about this? And, and even being proactive when they see some, exploit that was, very publicized that happened, communicating with them, hey, you've seen this is what it really means, this is how it could impact us, this is what we're doing to make sure we're mitigating, or we're not vulnerable because of this reason, or we knew about this before and mitigated it. Because by the time it hits mainstream media, we've known about it for weeks or even longer, and so that we may have been proactive in addressing it. Or even they love to hear when we tell them beforehand and then they see it mainstream media, and then people call them and they said, oh yeah, we've been looking at this for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, with that, Kyle, I'm sorry, I'm going to let you sound like you want to jump in.
I was just going to say, the Russia nation state, that's not a new threat to us, so, when they ask, it's like, well, they've been on our radar for, quite a while. So.
Yeah, I was curious.
Yeah, but there's a value in that of being able to proactively, to your point, proactively say, it's not them reaching out to us, but it's us reaching out to them and saying, this is on our radar. This is what's happening. This is the risk level that we're at because we're XYZ. And this is where we're falling in this. This is how we're monitoring the situation. This is how we're upping our concentration around, et cetera, how we're mitigating the potential risk. I'll let you know if anything comes out of it further. And then instead of them coming to us, it's us coming to them with that valuable information, which again gets that buy-in across the board.
Excellent. We got a question I actually want to ask. It was a good one. Thank you, Joe. Healthcare companies we touched on this a little bit. We're talking about tech debt, obsolescence of processes. Perhaps maybe this is more resonates more with the healthcare systems. Maybe not. Depends on your view of things. In terms of where healthcare can be behind the curve, be behind the times, or constantly in a catch-up mode, 3-5 years behind. From a talent perspective, do you feel this creates more opportunity for more junior level professionals to get a shot and get trained up? Or do you find organizations are so resource bound that we don't have the luxury to take more junior level talent to help train up? And as a CISO, what is your view on that? And again, I know we touched on this a little earlier, but again, since it's a question, it's relevant for the team. Certainly want to ask it. And then that also lends itself to a second part to that question that I'll get to, but I'll pause there and get your view on that.
I would say it varies for everybody, if you, when I think the reputation comes from the provider side, where you have, tens of thousands of, doctors' offices and hospitals of varying sizes who struggle with trying to get people because it's a low margin business, and they're trying to save lives, and they have IT people, but security people, or and as long as they're compliant, then they're kind of okay. But and so they struggle, and they don't have the labor categories to pay for the people, because now cybersecurity more expensive. So the point about opportunities for junior level people are great when you have senior level people to mentor them.
Sure.
Otherwise, you just hire junior level people and you're kind of starting from scratch, and you'd make all these rookie mistakes. And so it's kind of a catch-22 in that sense, and that, you want to be able to, so ironically, it's a better place to go into a more mature organization that's a lot of people that can be mentors and can feed people in and make this pipeline. And frankly, a company like us, should be a company that brings in lots of junior people, trains them up, and let them go out to support the world, and get them out there and help our providers and other peers and things like that who don't have the pipeline to be able to support us. So it's kind of a challenge, but I agree that generally healthcare is, behind, let's say, of course, finance.
Of course.
I think
so I want to bring up, Rick, so you're going to send your talent my way? Is that what I just heard?
You've got an influx.
I would hope to. I would love to. Yes. Just we're not at that point yet, but that's the goal.
That too. We'll take them as well. Thank you.
I think security does have an advantage as well from a career pathing standpoint within, just general IT professionals. It is kind of that next step in a lot of, IT professionals' careers. So, kind of having senior leadership that can mentor, more, maybe just more, traditional infrastructure individuals, and starting to give them some of that security mindset, and really, kind of building that talent from within. I think that's a successful path where, it's kind of that next career progression where you're really great at, this one function or this domain. And, as you learn more, then you really learn kind of those security components, and really how to configure things in best practice. So building talent from within an organization, kind of starting out, with more junior individuals, and just coaching them up, I think is an important aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Barbie?
And when you're doing so you can get creative too, not just IT, but GRC is a whole nother realm. Like, security is not this, and we often see it as this or this. We are either entry or we're not entry, and we're senior and we know it. But when reality, it's more like, and there's domains, and there's in-depth expertise in some of those domains. And then there's generalists that have expertise across multiple domains. And then there is people that are new and they need help within to be pulled in. But you don't just have to have a talent set of IT. That is one of the channels that you can use, but you can also use trainers. You can use auditors. You can use people that write policy and procedures outside of security and privacy. You can use content creators. There's a vast arena of places that we can really resource that talent and get it in. But it also goes back to small and medium businesses generally have to start with the more senior roles, because we need somebody that's going to be able to build it out and do it on day one. And then as we grow, that's when we're able to pull in. But another thing that is for the talent pipeline is you can take somebody from a different part of security and grow them into other roles as well. So maybe they initially got in at GRC, but they want to do pen testing one day, or they want to do incident response one day, or they want to break apart and do threat intelligence one day. And all of those are fantastic, wonderful careers we can help grow, develop in the multiple levels of the multiple domains of security without being tied down to this methodology or thinking that we only have entry level or security professionals.
Right. So training, development, succession planning, creating opportunities to elevate up or cross-functionally within an organization. And so that's a big topic that, again, unfortunately, we won't have enough time to unpack, right? With 6 minutes remaining in our time together, is talking about talent development and talent management and best practices. And one question I'm curious to know, and this is a question for all three of you, do you all get measured at the executive level for talent attraction, hiring, or retention? Like what in the people category do you get held accountable to? I mean, obviously go fill the positions that you have and do that yesterday, so you have adequate resources to keep keep adversaries out of our environment. But is there some type of measurable agreement that you have in place that's you're held accountable to? And if so, what does that look like?
I guess accountable is not a thing, kind of graded, kind of like measured on obviously attrition or why attrition happens. There's also, we have, workforce engagement surveys where we get graded on like how people kind of rate the management teams and things like that. That's another thing. Obviously, diversity and inclusion is very important. Centene is, on the, top of the list in diversity and inclusion, but, frankly, not as much in the cybersecurity group. In IT, definitely so, but, and so like what we're doing to try to attract, more people to have a more diverse workforce in there. But I would say like, accountable, but just kind of, it's measured and it's kind of monitored.
Yeah, great. Kyle?
Yeah, I've worked for a larger organization where, there certainly was more of a formal program around, tracking your attrition rate. Now I am in a smaller team. So it's certainly, really it's not as much of a formal measurement, but, more personal conversations with the executive leadership on, why some of these changes are happening. So
beautiful. Barbie, one last to you, and we'll move on to one last question before we wrap up.
Same as Kyle, smaller organizations. So we do have OKRs, and we have our key objectives and our key results. So we do have where we get 360 reviews and things of that nature. Not as official in smaller companies usually, but I think that if in those larger organizations, you do see a lot more common where they're looking at retention. They're looking at, when you do and you go into a meeting and you have the conversation around, okay, so is anybody at risk right now? Where are we? Who do we have? Who are we growing? Who are we developing? What are their aspirations? How are we making sure that we're maintaining them and we're mentoring them and we're getting to them the positions that they want? And who are the people that are happy just where they are and they're completely fulfilled with what they do, which is completely okay as well. So I think the maturation of a company makes a big difference, but as a leader, there is definitely an internal drive that I personally have, that I measure myself to my team's success and development. And so I did want to bring that up, is that you can have metrics, but there's also your
an expectation or an self-accountability that you have, that you expect, to have a high standard, and this is something you pride yourself in doing, versus that of a more corporate formalized structure that Rick was talking about and that Kyle was alluding to, that in a small organization, it's just more of a conversation, an agreement that we made that, okay, let's attract the A caliber people that we can, let's train them up and let's empower them to be the best versions of themselves and get the job done at the best ability, and let's elevate. Well, great. We're almost at time. So a couple things. First of all, thank you for joining us here at CyberSN for our CISO roundtable discussion. I know there was a few more questions that did funnel through, and I apologize, I can't get to every one of them. Thank you to our panelists, Kyle, Rick, and Barbie, for weighing in, sharing your insights, putting up with my technology issues on my end. I'll fix that for the next chapter of this. And I certainly do appreciate everything that you did share. If you all have questions, you as in the audience have questions that you would like to connect with us offline about, feel free to email us at CyberSN, or feel free to connect with these folks. I don't know what forums you choose to be contacted, or if you don't at all, I'll leave that to the three of y'all. But I know the three of you are pretty established out there in terms of social media. So I'll defer to you all if you feel comfortable with that to happen. If you are, please check out our website at cybersn.com. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us in the future, or more about these panel discussions. Again, we're going to make an effort to have one of these once every other month and change up the topics at the CISO level to talk about various different topics as well. So feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter is at cybersn_SN. And then we have a YouTube channel. All this asset will be publicized on all three, cleaned up, of course. And then we will have this on our website as well. Thank you all again for joining and really appreciate it. Have a great day.